Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's breaking update comes with serious implications for the ongoing Ukraine war. Belarus has just made a move that could completely shift the balance of power in Eastern Europe. What's happening right now is not just another diplomatic gesture or military exercise. It's a signal, a strong one, that Belarus is stepping up its involvement in a conflict that's already redrawing the map of global geopolitics. Let's unpack exactly what's going on, what Belarus has done, and what this means for Ukraine, Russia, and the rest of Europe. In the past few days, reports have surfaced indicating that Belarus has begun deploying advanced missile systems and mobilizing additional troops near its southern border, just a few kilometers from Ukrainian territory. While Belarus has long been an ally of Russia, this is the first time we're seeing such a direct and potentially aggressive stance from Minsk since the full-scale war began in 2022. President Alexander Lukashenko, who has maintained power in Belarus through close ties with Moscow, seems to have crossed a new threshold of commitment to the Kremlin's cause. Intelligence sources suggest that Belarusian bases are now being used to host Russian tactical nuclear weapons, a move that could dramatically change NATO's defensive calculations in Eastern Europe. This isn't coming out of nowhere. For months, analysts have warned that Belarus could serve as a launchpad for renewed Russian offensives, especially if the war in eastern Ukraine continues to grind down Russian forces. The recent movements along the Belarus-Ukraine border are likely part of a broader strategy to stretch Ukrainian defenses thin. Kyiv now has to divert troops and air defense systems to the north, fearing another potential assault from that direction. That alone could weaken Ukraine's ability to maintain its current positions in the east and south, where some of the fiercest fighting continues. What's particularly alarming is the timing of this move. Just as Western aid to Ukraine faces political roadblocks in Washington and divisions within Europe, Russia seems to be testing new ways to gain leverage. By involving Belarus more directly, Moscow may be signaling that it's ready to open another front or at least force Ukraine to reconsider its strategy. Lukashenko has always played a careful balancing act, supporting Putin publicly while avoiding direct combat involvement. But now, with Russian troops stationed permanently on Belarusian soil and the country's airfields reportedly hosting Russian bombers again, that line between ally and co-combatant is blurring fast. The implications extend far beyond Ukraine. NATO is watching closely, especially Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, countries that share borders with Belarus and have repeatedly warned about the militarization of the region. Polish officials have already called emergency security meetings after Belarusian forces conducted what they described as defensive exercises just 30 kilometers from the Polish border. NATO surveillance flights over the area have also increased significantly in the past 48 hours. The alliance understands that any escalation involving Belarus could trigger a wider crisis, given its geographic position as a bridge between Russia and the European Union. Meanwhile, inside Belarus, the government's narrative is changing. State media is framing these deployments as preventive security measures against what it calls NATO provocations and Ukrainian terrorist threats. It's the same language Russia used before its full-scale invasion, a worrying sign that Belarus might be preparing its population for a larger role in the conflict. There are even reports that Belarusian military units have begun joint drills with Russian tactical nuclear units, a move that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. Western intelligence believes these exercises are meant to normalize the idea of nuclear readiness and send a message to NATO that Russia's allies are not just passive supporters but active participants. From a strategic standpoint, Belarus's involvement gives Russia several key advantages. First, it creates a new axis of potential attack, forcing Ukraine to defend a border more than 1,000 kilometers long. Second, it offers logistical benefits. Russia can move troops, fuel, and ammunition through Belarus without the need to stretch its already strained transport networks in occupied Ukraine. And third, it adds psychological pressure. The thought of another invasion route, even if it doesn't materialize immediately, could disrupt Ukrainian morale and complicate operational planning. However, this move also carries significant risks for Belarus itself. Lukashenko's regime is already under heavy sanctions and facing growing internal dissent. Many Belarusians oppose the war and have no interest in seeing their country dragged into it. If Belarus becomes a direct participant, it could face severe economic collapse and possibly domestic unrest. The opposition in exile, led by Sviatlana Tikhanovskaya, has already issued statements warning that Lukashenko's decisions are pushing the nation toward disaster. Internationally, Belarus could become a legitimate target for Ukrainian retaliation, which Kyiv has so far avoided. Ukrainian officials have stated clearly that if Belarusian forces cross the border, they will be treated as invaders. That would open a new and dangerous chapter in the war. It's also important to look at how Russia benefits from this politically. Putin gains a loyal partner who can divert Western attention and resources. Every time Belarus escalates tension, it forces NATO to respond, whether through sanctions, troop deployments, or increased surveillance. That ties down Western assets and reduces the immediate pressure on Russian positions in eastern Ukraine. In essence, Belarus becomes a force multiplier for Moscow's strategy, not necessarily by fighting, but by creating new uncertainties that the West must account for. At the same time, this development shows the limits of Western deterrence. Despite warnings and sanctions, Belarus continues to slide deeper into Moscow's orbit. The deployment of Russian nuclear weapons there was already a red line for many European leaders, but beyond condemnation and new restrictions, there hasn't been a major shift in Western policy. This could embolden not just Russia and Belarus, but other authoritarian states watching how the West handles creeping escalation. Looking ahead, several scenarios are possible. The first is that Belarus remains a staging ground, hosting Russian equipment, conducting joint exercises, and threatening action without actually invading. This would still serve Moscow's purposes by keeping Ukraine under constant pressure. The second, more dangerous scenario is that Russia and Belarus coordinate a limited offensive from the north to stretch Ukrainian lines. Even a small operation, perhaps aimed at drawing attention away from the Eastern Front, could have a massive psychological and tactical impact. And finally, the third scenario, though less likely, is that Belarus takes a fully active role, sending its own troops into Ukraine under the pretext of protecting border security. That would be a turning point not just for the war, but for European security as a whole. In response, Ukraine is already adapting. Satellite imagery shows the construction of new fortifications along the northern border and the deployment of additional air defense systems. Kyiv knows it cannot afford to be caught off guard again like in February 2022. Meanwhile, Ukrainian intelligence continues to monitor troop movements inside Belarus and share data with NATO partners. Western allies, too, are reinforcing their eastern flank. The U.S. has increased reconnaissance flights over Belarusian territory, and Poland is accelerating its military modernization program, buying new tanks, air defense systems, and drones in anticipation of possible escalation. Ultimately, Belarus's shift marks a dangerous new phase in the Ukraine war, one where the lines between participants and bystanders are fading fast. The Kremlin's strategy appears to be evolving from direct confrontation to a broader regional destabilization effort. By involving Belarus more deeply, Moscow sends a message that it is not isolated and that its allies are willing to take greater risks. For the West, this means the war is no longer confined to Ukrainian soil. It's a test of resolve, coordination, and endurance across all of Eastern Europe. So as this story develops, it's clear that the stakes are rising. Belarus's actions could determine whether the war drags on for years or explodes into something even larger. The world is watching, and every move from Minsk or Moscow now carries consequences far beyond the battlefield. What happens next could reshape not only the outcome of the Ukraine war, but the future of Europe's entire security landscape. Stay tuned. This is a story that's far from over, and the next few weeks could reveal whether Belarus's gamble will succeed or backfire dramatically.